He said to balance out things like Digital Millennium Copyright Act and other copyright. Privacy and access to records in the U.S., the universities and all educational levels have to comply with FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Protections Act, which says who can have access. The American HIPAA, Health Information Portability and Accountability Act, is actually really quite interesting for what they had to learn about the way data may be passed from one system to another. So from a health record to the insurance. So we are in education, we have to worry about the education record and the financial aid records. Should they ever be put together in any way? And if so, how is that going to be done in the most reasonable way? We're all concerned about government collection of information, whether we know about it or not. And so we have counter movements and the freedom from surveillance kind of movements. We're also very interested in government transparency. So the Freedom of Information Act, and that there are quite a few of those across most countries. But what's the freedom of information within an educational institution? What are you allowed to ask about the operation of the university, about the operation of its management systems? We have the right to information that goes with that, and also recently the Open Government Data Initiatives. So here's something that's not a law. It's an initiative. It's an idea of where to go, and that's how do we bring those into learning analytics. So, as somebody just pointed out in a question there, it's not just government we have to worry about. We've got businesses, corporations, and so much more. I mean, the CCTV cameras, the social media, social networking, internet, search engines, Google Maps, and then now there's a concern about drones. What's your privacy about drones? Now, what if we start using drones for learning? I'm not sure. I'm trying to. But you can see at the side there, who is it that people are, an American survey on who is it that people are trying to avoid. They change their behavior to avoid. Number one up there is hackers or criminals, but number two is advertisers. So right at the moment, they're not yet avoiding educational institutions or learning analytic engines, but that's probably because they just don't know that they should. A little bit more on it's not just government, and again, this is in connection with, again, another question about the right to be forgotten. If you look at, when you start looking at what's happening there, a lot of the corporations are making those leading decisions about information policy, and they're implementing it. It is Google that is administering the right to be forgotten in Europe. They're the ones who adjudicate the claims, and you can see that they've had requests from government, 8,500 requests in 2015, which they say not all were removed. And then European privacy, they've had about 586,000 requests and 1.7 million URLs evaluated for removal. So who's watching the watchers? No matter how, you may not like your government, but whose job is it really? So COPERT, what policy decisions are major educational learning management systems implementing? Just as we said, right? We haven't got to the algorithms. We just want to know, what are they doing for information privacy, data use and reuse, right to be forgotten and the right to redress? How can you get your data pulled out of there? Another layer is, of course, all the human rights, and I think this was touched on well in the last paper as well. But again, these are transnational perspectives and expectations of what is the right thing to do, and and what is a human right in relation to information. So where do human rights and freedoms coincide with institutional policies? Again, I'm thinking of the educational institutions that adopt practices and policies. How do they bring human rights into that? You'll notice that the UN General Assembly also now has got cut off a little bit, but the promotion, practices, and enjoyment of human rights in the internet ties into education in that sense. So is every university going to give free internet access everywhere to students? How is that going to work? So where does learning analytics meet information policy? I think it meets where information rights intersects with education rights, where systems development intersects with information, where those transformative trends associated with the internet and a network society intersect with educational practice, And again, where corporations are the systems developers, privacy managers, data security managers, and the arbitrators of information retention, display, use, and removal. And I invite you to help me continue that list. But I want to go back to information and policy and learning analytics. So one of the things I said about the frameworks that information policy offers to help organize our thinking about issues. So there are several different ways that they can think about it. Brayman's informational activities, that list I gave at the beginning, the creation, processing, flows, and uses. But you can also think about the information lifecycle as well. We can organize by government policy and law, which is normally the way government thinks of it. The big level cross-country national concerns tend to look at the policy and law of the government rather than the information development phases or information use phases. We can look at long-held societal concerns, say for literacy, and then emerging ones as well, perhaps the values into design. So these organizing frameworks, the information life cycle, we can see this in a number of areas, demonstrated in a number of areas. Take the publishing, we look at creation, storage, use, sharing, archiving, and then the destruction of records for records management. In publishing, we'll think of creation, production, distribution, access, and use. So what's the information life cycle? And I think you were, again, the previous paper was laying out some of those phases too. What are each of the information phases that information that goes into a learning analytics system? What is it? Where do they go through? One of the things that I find about that life cycle is not, it can perhaps get too static. And so the informational activities is a more open way of looking at things, the processing, flows, access, and the flows in particular starts making us think about cross-country flows as well. As I said, most of the time when you talk about information policy, it ends up talking about government and law. And so we can look there at information rights, information property, access and restrictions, and then the societal concerns, digital divide, information literacy, digital literacy, open access, changing societal values, globalization, et cetera. So these they have pros and cons. And what I'm suggesting is that we need to look at all of them. The information life cycle is actually what happens to the information, so we need to do that. There's flows in and out, boundary spanning and crossing dynamic processes. We need to look at the informational activities. The downside of the information life cycle is, as I said, it really, I think, directs attention to discrete, static, known information activities. If the Brayman's informational activities opens it up a bit more, but it's such a wide scope to consider that may be a bit of a con. It's just too much. It's better as an analytic, maybe better as an analytical technique to move into the next generation. The government policy and law, of course, you have to align with government and legal perspectives, but it follows rather than leads change, that we get the E policies well after the E has come and made a mess. And the societal concerns, of course, this embodies values of a better society, but the problem is you have to kind of decide on what a better society is. So we have to, and the pedagogical concerns are one of the one of the examples of concerns emergent. What do we want to do with education? What is our goal? We have to agree on what that is. So I'm going to conclude here with sort of another slice across these. That there are some aspects related to implementation. And I think, again, that the previous speaker did both the implementation and compliance phase here. The implementation is addressing those pivotal points in data collection and use that are coincident with information policy decisions. Really the practical aspects of what data you're going to collect where, under what circumstances. Compliance, we are worrying about law. We want to know we have to comply with law. We have to comply with FERPA or the equivalent, the right to redress, et cetera. But the one that I want to add on here is the aspiration. And I think there are a lot of things that we're trying to do, and the reason it's really hard to pin things down is because there's things that we want to do and we continuously want to strive to do better. And these are the issues of putting values into the design, the value of universal education, the value of access to information, which will translate into an implementation of informed consent. So I think really this is my major contribution here is to think about taking those phases and lumping them in ways that we can make sense of them instead of the whole thing being a mess. And the aspiration one is the hardest one, but I bet is the one that we all want to work on. So I will end there.
Questions for Kai?
Hey.
Thanks, that's great. What vehicles do you propose would be good ones for us working on this together?
I guess I don't know quite what you mean by vehicles.
Well,
I like airplanes,
how
but
do we go about it as a community?
Yes,
and
yes.
extending it beyond this community?
Well, I think what is really nice is to hear your talks, because obviously we're all working at the same kind of stage there. And I think working on what's tractable. What is it that's the first thing that's tractable? And it may be something related to complying with the law, or with laws that hold across everywhere. I think getting an understanding, everybody get an understanding of the information life cycle, so that when you think about use, you've also thought about data collection. The creation phases are the data collection. But there's also a creation aspect to that data is created every time we have an online conversation. So that's kind of a complication there. But I think it's also, for me, it's a lot about thinking about all phases of the life cycle when you first do it. In research and when you do a survey, they say, don't collect data you're not going to use. Well, we have at the moment the idea that, well, we can just collect everything and then do something with it. We might need it later. And even to start with, at that point, understanding the values of not collecting data across, so you don't have to forget it later, you don't have to, so bringing some of those values across the system. It's complicated. I think that's why I'm trying to work this out. And I've got these four, and for me to understand that there's certain things that you have to do by law, which are not necessarily the things you would do for your societal concerns. So where do you put your effort? You have to do the legal stuff, but does that mean you're going to drop something out of your information collection because you didn't have time because you had to spend your time on the legal stuff? So I think it's a really good question, and I think we just need to do more of this and add whatever other chunks of concerns that you think fit. Good, that was a short paper, short questions. It's okay by me. Thank you.
Thanks, John.